Hello, I'm photographer Bjørn Joachimsen from Norway. I'm an analog photographer mainly, also an ambassador for Focus Nordic, where I'm working with brands like Ilford Photo, Kodak, Sirui and Nisi, etc. Today we are going to talk about just analog photography. The topic of today is these reusable cameras, which has entered the market during the recent years. Reusable camera, might ask, aren't all cameras reusable? That you can insert a film, you can expose all the frames and then have it developed and insert another film. So why the term reusable camera? The term is opposed to a disposable camera, which many people know from many years ago, where you hand all the camera over to the lab and the camera is disposed or go to waste after the film is developed. So this is a more environmentally friendly alternative where you can use the camera over and over again for many years. The heritage of these cameras actually are the box cameras from the 40s and the 50s, which were very popular. And also Instamatic cameras, who many people are familiar with. It's actually the same concept. It's a simple, cheap camera that you can make photographs with, and there are almost no settings, or no settings at all for these cameras. They are focus free, that means fixed focus. There is no option to adjust aperture or shutter speed on these cameras. So the only thing you have to do is to advance the film, find an interesting subject and then click the button like this. These cameras are made by plastic and they're lightweight. If you drop them on the ground, they will most likely survive. So it's a perfect camera for parties, beaches, festivals, concerts or everything else in your daily life. Apart from the camera with a lens and these basic features, there's also a flash feature on most of these cameras. So you have to insert a battery somewhere in the camera, standard battery, and you have a flash on off button in front or wherever. Now back to the lens of this camera. The lens is usually a wide angle lens with a fixed aperture. Aperture is usually f9 and the shutter speed is also fixed. It is usually like 1/100th of a second. Now the flash is charged, by the way, so I'm ready to make a flash photograph. Advance the film and then you can... So there is no settings, and that's the advantage of this camera. This is film photography. What kind of film to use? Because there is not a very wide open aperture at the lens, you should avoid using films like ISO 50 or 100. The most usable films are between 200 and 800. If you're using 400, I think you have a very good film speed to use for most situations. So for instance, this Kodak Ultramax is a very good option for such cameras. You can shoot in daylight, you can shoot in afternoons, but in the evening you will most likely experience underexposed photos, so then you should consider going for ISO 800 or even more. For black and white, I would really recommend this Ilford XP2 film. This is a black and white film that you can hand to any lab for 1 hour processing if you like, because it's developed in color chemistry, so it's very easy to handle. It also gives very good results, very high sharpness and flexibility when it comes to exposure. Of course, you can also use classic black and white films like Ilford HP5 Plus or Agfa Photo APX 400, which have more classic grain, and you can develop these yourself. Or hand them to a lab, of course. There are many camera models you can use. This is a camera that is using 35mm. Actually, all of them are doing. This is a Kodak camera, also a 35mm. This camera and most reusable cameras have a frame size of 24 by 36 millimeter. That's a standard 35 millimeter format. This camera from Kodak is quite interesting. It's a half frame camera. That means that while all the other cameras give you 36 frames per roll or 24, you can have up to 72 frames per roll with this camera, because each frame is half the size, like 18 by 24 millimeter. So here's an example from this Kodak camera. You can have, from the lab you will get 2 images on each sheet, and you can make interesting stories that way, to combine 2 images. We can see that it works quite well in shadow, in daylight, and you can also use it indoors. For instance, in a shopping mall, you will also get acceptable results with this camera with Ultramax 400. With the black and white, you will get images like this from a lab, from a standard lab. It's 4 by 6 inch or 10 by 15 centimeters prints. These are made with the Ilford XP2 Super film. So when you're starting out with analog, if you're new to this, one of the things that might happen is that the film is not inserted correctly. And often people think that there's malfunction in the camera, but most of the time the film is not inserted correctly. The first thing to do is to open the back door. But what if there is a film already inside? It will be damaged if I just open the camera. So how to check that? I can use the rewind function and then rewind, and there is no resistance in here, it's loose, and there is no sound within the camera when I rewind. That means the camera is empty, and I can open the back door without risk. The camera is empty. This is the compartment for the film cartridge, and this is the take-up spool. So after exposing all the 24 frames on this roll, all the film will be wound up on this spool. The first thing I have to do is to pull out the rewind crank to make space for the cartridge, and then I insert the cartridge. In this camera there is a small slot in the rewind, in the take-up spool, so I have to put the film tongue into that slot, which I will now do. There we are, and then I start winding the film. As you can see, the camera is winding the film now. I have to do this most likely twice. First I wind the film. I can see also that this rewind crank is revolving. That means the film is correctly inserted. And I press the shutter button and I repeat once more until I can see number 1 in the film frame counter window. Then I'm ready to make my first photograph with this Kodak camera, like this. So what to do when all the frames are exposed? This is a 24 frame roll, but you can also have 36 frames. But with this camera, which is a half frame camera, you will have 48 or 72 frames. So you can observe the number 48 in the film frame counter. You're done. What you should not do is to just open the camera, because all the photos will be ruined. All the entire film roll will be exposed by daylight. So what to do is you have to rewind the film. And the first thing you do is to release the rewind function by a small button on the camera. The next thing to do is to fold out the rewind crank and start rewinding. And you will feel some resistance as long as the film is being rewound, and it will get loose when you're done. So now I can feel that the film is loose from the take-up spool. Then I'm ready to open the camera again, and we can see this is the exposed film roll. So what to do next then with this film roll? Of course, you can process color images yourself, but it's quite difficult to do it at home. So I'd recommend using a lab or a camera store which have a lab. and hand it over for developing, and you can also have it scanned. Then you can have such photos, physical images from your film roll. You can also have digital files at most labs today, which I will send you after developing. But you can also have the roll only developed and you do the scanning yourself. So a very smart solution to use at home is this Kodak film scanner. Because when you get it back from the lab, you will have negatives. And negatives is like this. You can insert the negatives into this film scanner. You can just click some buttons and then you will have digital files. You have an option to save the images on a memory card, and you can also use HDMI connection to show it on a display. Very cool scanner for home scanning. So what can you use these cameras for? What kind of photography? Actually a lot, I would say. But since they're plastic cameras, they're very hard to destroy. They have no electronics. You can use it when it's raining. You can drop it on the ground. Of course, you should not do. They're very usable for like everyday use, where you don't have to be afraid of damaging your camera. Actually, if you drop it on the ground, it will most likely survive. If you are new to analog photography, this is a very good start if you want to make it easy. If you're experienced in analog photography, it's also interesting camera because there are no settings, so you have the freedom to don't think about the settings and maybe play with more with your analog photography and don't be so serious all the time. So I would recommend give this camera a try anyway if you're experienced or totally new to analog photography. It's a lot of fun, it's easy, and you will have a good photography experience with it. Thank you.